Hey everyone, so this is going to be my video tutorial over reading for conflict, and like always I'm going to be using The Outsiders as my mentor text. So our objective for this lesson is going to be examine how a character's action create conflict in the story. So oftentimes it'll be dialogue or it'll be a specific action that kind of kickstarts or starts off the rest of the story. So we talk about this usually being the inciting incident. So what is going to create the conflict or what is going to create the issues that the character must then solve. So the question that I'm going to be modeling answering is, what is the most important event in the story so far, why, and what prompted the main character to act the way as they did? So before we get into looking at my textual example, I kind of want to talk about the three main types of conflict that you can have in a story. And we talked about this a lot last semester. So the first one that you can have, let me get my pen here, is man versus man. So that's where you have kind of like the very famous like Harry Potter versus Voldemort. So it's one man fighting against another man, and like whoever wins, is the winner, usually in physical combat, or if it's Harry Potter, they're using magic. And then you have man versus nature. So when I think of man versus nature, I think of Philip's adventure in the Cay, where he's having to, live on this desolate island by himself. Maybe there's not a whole lot of water on the island. I also think about Jack London's To Build a Fire, which is a great short story, where the protagonist, the unnamed protagonist of that story, is having to survive in an extremely cold environment. So that's one. And then we have our last one, which is man versus society. So this is where, and you see this a lot in dystopian novels, and we can kind of make that comparison here in The Outsiders, where one person or, maybe a small group of people is having to go against the large people as a whole. So if you've ever seen, as an example, either read or seen The Hunger Games, that's a perfect example of where Katniss Everdeen is having to go against everything that has ever happened in Panem. So she, is the first one to ever rewrite what the Hunger Games are. She starts battling against the system and how it's set up. So those are just a couple of examples of types of conflict. You might be asked to analyze those in one of the questions prompted to you. So it'd be good to brush up on those. In our textual example that we're going to be taking a look at, we're really going to be hitting kind of our inciting incident. So this is where all of the action after this point is going to be focused on what's going to happen to these two main characters. So what has already happened up to this point? So Johnny and Ponyboy have gone to the drive-in theater. They were, hanging out with two Soch girls that maybe they shouldn't have been hanging out with. And we're going to see that that doesn't really play out well for them. And we're even going to see how a prior flashback that happened about Johnny is going to come to fruition. So we're going to read through, and then we're going to kind of examine, how is this the most important part of the story so far? Why is this important? And what prompted the main character to act in the way that they did? So, "It's too late now," Johnny said. "Here they come." 5 Soches were coming straight at us, and from the way they were staggering, I'd figured they were really pickled. That scared me. A cool, deadly bluff could sometimes shake them off, but not if they outnumbered you 5-2 and were drunk. Johnny's hand went to his back pocket, and I remembered his switchblade. I wished for that broken bottle. I'd sure show them if I could use it if I had to. Johnny was scared to death. I mean it. He was as white as a ghost, and his eyes were wild-looking, like the eyes of an animal in a trap. We had backed against the fountain, and the Soches surrounded us. They smelled so heavily of whiskey and English leather that I almost choked. I desperately wished that dairy and soda had come along hunting for me. The 4 of us could handle them easily, but no one was around, and I knew Johnny and I were going to have to fight it out alone. Johnny had a blank, tough look on his face. You'd have to know him to see the panic in his eyes. I stared at the Soches coolly. Maybe they could scare us to death, but we'd never let them have the satisfaction of knowing it. It was Randy and Bob and 3 other Soches. and they recognized us. I knew Johnny recognized them. He was watching the moonlight glint off Bob's rings with huge eyes. "Hey, what do you know?" Bob said a little unsteadily. "Here's the little greasers that picked up our girls. Hey, greasers." "You're out of your territory," Johnny warned in a low voice. "You better watch it." Randy swore at us, and they stepped in closest. They stepped in closer. Bob was eyeing Johnny. "Nut, pal, you're the one that better watch it. Next time you want a broad, pick your own kind. Dirt." I was getting mad. I was hating them enough to lose my head. "You know what a greaser is?" Bob asked. "White trash with long hair." I felt the blood draining from my face. I'd been cussed out and sworn at, but nothing ever hit me like that did. Johnny Cake made a kind of gasp, and his eyes were smoldering. "You know what a Soch is," I said, my voice shaking with rage. "White trash with Mustangs and Madras." And then, because I couldn't think of anything bad enough to call them, I spit at them. Bob shook his head, smiling slowly. "You could use a bath, greaser, and a good working over. We've got all night to do it. Give the kid a bath, David." I ducked and tried to run for it, but the Soch caught my arm and twisted it behind my back and shoved my face into the fountain. I fought, but the hand at the back of my neck was strong, and I had to hold my breath. I'm dying, I thought, and I wondered what was happening to Johnny. I couldn't hold it any longer. I fought again desperately, but only sucked in water. I'm drowning, I thought. They've gone too far. A red haze filled my mind, and I slowly relaxed. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the pavement beside the fountain, coughing water and gasping. I lay there weakly, breathing in air and spitting out water. The wind blasted through my soaked sweatshirt and dripping hair. My teeth chattered unceasingly, and I couldn't stop them. I finally pushed myself up and leaned back against the fountain, the water running down my face. Then I saw Johnny. He was sitting there next to me, one elbow on his knee, staring straight ahead. He was a strange greenish white, and his eyes were huger than I'd ever seen them. "I killed him," he said slowly. "I killed that boy." Bob, the handsome Soch, was lying there in the moonlight, doubled up and still. A dark pool was growing from him, spreading slowly over the blue-white cement. I looked at Johnny's hand. He was clutching the switchblade, and it was dark at the hilt. My stomach gave a violent jump, and my blood turned icy. So if we kind of go back up to our question, so what was the most important event in the story so far? Why? And what prompted the main character to act the way that they did? So if we are kind of looking at answering just that first part of that question, well, obviously the most important thing is that Johnny just killed a Soch. So even though Ponyboy was kind of getting drowned and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna die," it takes it to a whole nother level to actually have murder. So there's always been this discussion of having fights between the Socs and trying to one-up each other, but this is the first time that it's ever gotten to this level, that, somebody is actually murdered another person. This is also important when we start realizing how young these boys are. So even though they're pretty young, but the setting is in like the 1960s, they're not going to get off easily. So now this has created conflict. Now they have to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? Are we going to run away? Are we going to try to, bury his body somehow? What's going to happen? And we kind of answered the why in that question. So, why is this important? Well, now, they're really out of options. They have to somehow get out of town or, bury the body or do something with that. They have to get away from the crime scene. When we take a look at that last question, what prompted the main character to act as they did, it's pretty hard to say. So we know that our main character here is Pony, and he wasn't really able to help, but you could tell that before he was getting drowned, he was obviously very upset at how things were going. And he wasn't happy being called white trash with long hair, so that's why he kind of steps up and tries to scuffle with them, even though it doesn't work out to the best of his ability. So take this kind of video tutorial and use it to help you as you're reading through your book, looking for conflict and how that's beginning to be developed in your individual story.